Fair use, y'all.
Welcome back.
Shalom, everybody. This is Jackie Selah. And I just wanted to share a little bit of a couple of videos I was watching earlier. It's about the orphan trains. If you're not familiar with orphan trains, it's a part of American history that I had never really heard about. I'm sure most people haven't. But apparently, once this land was invaded and taken over by European foreigners, they decided that in order to boost up their uh, labor pool and also just to boost up their numbers, that they would transport orphans, which were mostly in New York City, across the United States on trains. And so they would go um, into the different cities, and people would go to the train depots and pick up children. Um, or they would go to world fairs and get babies and children. So it's pretty interesting. The reason that I'm bringing it out, I'll tell you about that later. But as you watch this video, besides the orphan trains, you're going to see a couple of other things that, if you're not familiar with it, it'll be interesting. So let's go. This is the channel of Jared Boosters. The name of this video is The Orphan Trains Replenishing America's Workforce, New York City, Seneca Village, Croton Aqueduct. So if you like the content, go check out Jared Booster's channel. Here we go.
In the mid-19th century, we see many depictions of American cities with extremely beautiful and picturesque architecture. Some would call the architecture Old World, reminiscent of the classic buildings that are found throughout Europe. Indeed, we have a cornucopia of architects imported to America from a wide variety of European countries at this time. These men envisioned an America with a flair for their specific European heritage, and thus we are told that the major cities began to rise like hotcakes all around the country. As we dive into the photography from the 19th century and into the turn of the century into the early 1900s, we have a few things that become abundantly clear. Today, I'd like to tie together the often misconstrued atmosphere of the mid-1800s in America, supplying you with ample information taken directly from the currently accepted resources to provide you with a definitive look at one of the strangest and seldom discussed events of the mid-1800s. That is, the orphan trains. Many photographs of America from the 19th century show a landscape that is already shaped. Cities that are formed, we're told, by the ingenuity of early European settlers. What we see in the photographs many times, however, is empty cities. We also see cities that are built with architecture that appears to exceed the means of the people that are constructing the cities. In short periods of time, usually less than 100 years, a city in America will go from what we're told was indigenous earthworks and mounds into a well thought out masonry and brick mass. Many of the
All right, so I just wanted to point out real quick the architecture of these buildings. Very intricate details, which is quite surprising for such a new country where you have people driving horse and buggy. They're new to a country. The streets are full of mud. Yet supposedly they built these structures, these very intricate structures. Hard to believe. Matter of fact, I don't believe it. But anyway, that's just a side note, not the point of this video, but I just wanted to point that out. So if that interests you, you might want to research old world structures or mud flood. Here we go. Let's go.
These cities in the photographs appear empty or barren, or the streets often mud covered. And while the masonry buildings appear much older than they should be for the photographs, we must begin to question the harsh conditions of the mid 1800s. Could weather events really have caused these buildings to appear so aged? It brings me back to the European architects said to have constructed these massive feats of engineering. Did they really build these structures and then basically leave them be? Meaning the cities that they were built in were then in charge of the upkeep. And essentially, most of these cities appeared to just let the buildings weather over time. That's what we see in the photographs from the mid to late 1800s, before times appear to change by the early 1900s, when the same architecture, the same structures, and the streets around them appear much more serviceable. Again, the question becomes, where are the people?
Where
And
are the
the answer
people?
may be more shocking than you
Yeah,
expect.
where are the
The
people?
architecture aside, we're told that a disproportionate amount of people were locked away in mental asylums in the mid 1800s in America.
That's where the
Another
people are?
key component to understanding America in the 1800s is to
So, wait a minute. You're in a new world. You just got here. Why are the people in asylums? It's just weird.
understand just how many asylums were being built. Not just a small building, a little retreat, or a doctor's office, but we're discussing over 500 massive, castle like structures, usually built in a Kirkbride plan in large forested areas away from the public. These buildings employed the finest of European architectural designs, and most of these asylums, almshouses, and sanitation centers
Okay, sorry, y'all. I had to
empty,
fast
yet
forward.
we often see these large packs of children seemingly roaming the streets unattended. How does this tie into the overarching narrative? Well, by the 1840s, large portions of the northern states had freed their enslaved people. This is a claim that we often see cited in many history books. What we don't see mentioned in the history books is, many times, the freed people were almost instantaneously locked away in asylums and sanitation centers. Hence, why we have so many of the large asylums being created in the early to mid 1800s.
Okay, so let's dig on that for a minute. He said that when people were freed, and we know who we're talking about, that's copper colored people, so-called African American black people, when they were freed or free to move about or moved out of their land, soon as they got out, they were locked up into these insane asylums or asylums. Let's go.
Think of the saying, seeking asylum. It wasn't just African Americans who faced these hardships. We also have countless indigenous people facing the same fate, as well as anyone really perceived by the larger society to be different. We're told, according to the official 1840 census, which was the first to report individuals as, quote, insane, that large numbers of newly freed individuals in northern states, in some reports, upwards of 40%, were locked away in asylums and considered to be insane. This becomes even more alarming when the results are compared with the census numbers for enslaved individuals in the South, where the number of individuals marked as, quote, insane was nowhere near as high. Politics aside, we can see how even when the freedmen were freed, they never really achieved their freedom from the tyrants and often faced even more hardships. The tragedy becomes...
All right, so you said that 40% of freed people were locked up in asylums. But now, when they were enslaved or indentured, I guess they were fine to work. But as soon as they were free, all of a sudden they became idiots and insane. This country is through.
the children of these individuals. And this is where
Now
our
look at the
story
children.
really begins to
Look
come
at
full
the
circle.
children.
Before
The parents are locked
1853,
up.
there was essentially no
Sorry,
place for the
Jared.
children of the
The parents are locked up. And now look at the children. In whose hands are the children? These innocent children look like they're in prison uniforms, put to work in a field. Wow. I mean, we knew this. But let's look at how some of it was done. Continue.
Insane to be housed. Many times, according to this narrative, these children would have to commit crimes just to get locked up and be taken off of the streets. Any family deemed unsuitable, we're told, could be subject to the cruelty of America and could be labeled unfit and committed to an asylum. What America didn't have in place from the earliest days of the 1800s until 1853 was a place for these newly orphaned children to go. We're told these children would often create tribes or gangs, usually an intermingling of all races and religions, who would walk the streets looking for food and handouts. Have you ever seen the film Gangs of New York? This is the way that these children orphan gangs are often depicted. New York is also key in this narrative. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible, but here are some facts to know before we dive in. Freemasonry is banned by the Catholic Church. Freemasonry arises from Rosicrucianism, which essentially postulates that the world is built on a secret esoteric order, which can be determined in part using factors such as geometry and gematria, which are also used in most Masonic constructions. New York, once home to a vast array of indigenous tribes and indigenous cities, with the Palisades even being discussed as a possible site for the ancient hidden city of Norumbega, by the early 1800s, New York was becoming abundantly more Catholic. A neighborhood of freed men, mostly African American, lived in New York City in what is today Central Park. Their rich and vastly built out neighborhood was called Seneca Village. Now, we've already discussed the large numbers of freed people that were being committed in the mid-1800s. We can see, in New York especially, that this is a practice done quite often and without warrant. While the vast landscapes of Seneca Village often operated outside the scope of most European New Yorkers' lives, the freedom of Seneca Village was first encroached upon when in 1837 construction began on the Croton
skip
distribution.
ahead a little bit. Give me a minute. Now, in these pictures, I just want you to look at the amount of children that there are. These are Mongoloid Native American children. Look at all the children. Orphanage, St. Mary's Orphan Asylum, Cincinnati, Ohio. St. Vincent's German Orphans Home. Hebrew Orphan Asylum, New York. Look at the
When
intricate
Olmsted's
detail.
plan for Central Park was first enacted, New York's population was roughly 300,000 people. According to the 1840 census, 312,710 people to be exact. An estimated 10,000 or more were homeless children. Not adults, children. The total number of homeless people was even higher. By 1850, The population of New York City was roughly 500,000 people. Of this number, over 30,000 were homeless children. That's 6% of the entire population, or over 1 in every 20 people in New York at the time was a homeless child. It's haunting to imagine.
Over
And while the
250,000
Catholic homeless
orphans.
shelters tried their best to house these victims, events like the forced abandoning of Seneca Village only exacerbated the issue. Was that the plan all along? As American ideals were being undermined, as motherless children roamed the streets in gangs, and freedmen.
Now, I just wanted you to notice one thing. It talked about, you probably didn't get a chance to read it, but it talked about a foundling hospital. A foundling hospital is a hospital that was designed to take care of abandoned babies. We're talking infants, we're talking babies. There were so many abandoned babies in New York and other large cities that they had to create specific hospitals to take care of all these babies. Now, don't you find that weird? Why in this new world are there so many parentless children and babies? Why is the question. Give me a minute.
Disgrace, best friend at Yale of Frederick Olmsted, to create the Children's Aid Society in
There were so many homeless children, he
1853.
created the
Now,
Children's
what
Aid
did the
Society.
Children's Aid Society do? At this point, you probably guessed it. They wrangled up all of those troubled, homeless youths, mostly Catholic, and they sent them to families all around the country, mostly Protestant. Families could request, like a draft, what type of child they wanted, from hair color, skin color, eye color, down to the education level of the parents. Seemingly, this was a plot that did not arise out of the kindness of one man's heart. This is not a plot that appears to have arose on a whim. What we appear to have is a long, calculated process enacted by members of Yale and other Ivy League schools. The end result? That's for you to decide. We have countless articles about these trains full of children being sent all around America, ready for adoption. Then we have sanitation fairs put in place to teach the country, mostly in the West, to take care of themselves. But more so, if you read between the lines, these fairs were to teach the new parents how to take care of their new investment, the orphan children.
All right, and really quick, I just want to point out one thing. This all is horrific. To know that so early on in this so-called country's beginning that there were this many homeless children, orphan children, abandoned babies. But notice these children. And then think about the children of the freed people who were put into asylums. What happened to their children? They were sent to the fields. And what did these children go through? Indentured servitude, indoctrination. My whole point of this video is how easy is it to indoctrinate a nation of people when a good portion of the population are children. You can literally tell them almost anything and they would believe it. Think about it. All right, so if you want to finish watching that or watch it out without my little 2 cents, again, that is Jared Boosters. The name of this video is The Orphan Trains Replenishing America's Workforce. New York City, Seneca Village, Croton Aqueduct. Yeah. They built America's labor force. A lot of it was children. A lot of it was labor, and you heard a good portion of it was eugenics, where they took Native American and so-called African American children, put them in homes, eventually through the intermixing with the other races. I guess the point was to create a better race of these immigrants. Eugenics. Wow. Okay. I'm going to go to the next video. I'll be right back. All right, family, we're back. And now we are with John Levi. John Levi is one of my favorite channels. He likes to dig on old world structures, mud flood, natural structures, and really just identifying how so much, in particular here in America, has been a bold-faced lie. We've been lied to on just about everything. John Levi recognizes this, and I hope you do too. But here we go. The name of this is Orphan Trains Populating Empty Cities. Y'all hear that? Empty cities with beautiful old world structures already here. Imagine that. Let go.
And here I was just watching something that was shared with me featuring Jerry Seinfeld, and it had to do with the Coney Island infant incubators. And the interviewer asks him about his history, and he says his father was an incubator baby. And the interviewer laughs as if he doesn't believe him. And I'm going to play that for you.
Early 1900s, my dad was an incubator baby.
And very strange. Of course, we've talked about this before, but in short, between 1854 and 1929, the relocating of about 200,000 orphaned, abandoned, abused, or homeless children took place. It's a very sad story, something in between acting as if they're doing a noble thing for these children and at the same time benefiting the needs for labor, for farmers, and even for the railroads.
You know, it just makes me look at the old Little Rascals just a little bit differently. Like, did their parents put them on that set, or who put them to work as actors? I don't know. Just a thought.
Here they're showing us advertisements placed in papers encouraging the adoption of children. Here we can see a poster. A number of children brought from New York are still without homes. Please call and see them. And often they were treated like farm animals. Their teeth were inspected. They were made to do push-ups and other tests of fitness. This program originally said to be started by this man, Charles Loring Brace, and we're told in the 1850s there was up to 30,000 homeless children in New York City. And New York City's
Again, those numbers are bananas. Just a minute.
families. And in short, these children were ultimately slaves, not sold for the love and care of a new family, but rather for their ability to labor. And I think this whole story is a lot more twisted than this simple and seemingly well-intended narrative. The children were told, your parents are not your parents. Your life begins when you are chosen.
Do either of you have any sense of how far back your ancestries go in New York? Have you ever?
Yeah, I mean, mine came in the 1920s from Ireland, Northern Ireland.
Mine about the same, early 1900s. My dad was an incubator baby in Coney Island. He was on display. They had just invented the incubator. Good.
You can literally tell me anything. I believe.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. And I thank you for joining me.
All right, so you heard it. The incubator babies. That's something I kind of skipped over that. We didn't go into much detail, but along with the orphan trains, they had displays at world fairs of babies in incubators. Now, where the babies came from, how they wind up in the incubators, we're really not quite sure, just like we're not sure where all these homeless children came from. But all of this is to say that when we as a people, I am an Israelite, formerly known as Black African American, when we are identifying who we are and people have the audacity to question, hey, we got to ask, do you know who you are? I mean, because we're looking at pictures of children, and those children are somebody's great grandparents, grandparents. So when your granddad said that his parents were immigrants that came over to America with not a dime, was that really true? Or were they chosen off of an orphan train? Or were they picked up at the World Fair? Would you know? Because when you're a child, it's easy to be indoctrinated. I mean, we all used to think Christopher Columbus discovered America. We all used to think we all came over here on slave ships. We used to think there was nobody over here but a few Native Americans. But there are history books and tons of information out there that tells a totally different story. And the truth of the matter is, we have been lied to about everything. And so, if you like the content, you want to check out John Levi, check out Jared Boosters. If you're interested in mud flood, old world structures, you might want to check out Nine Spirals channel or anybody on the 432 Drop Nation. There's a wealth of information. These brothers have done so much research and study, and they've gone down the rabbit hole. And like I said, pretty much everything we've been taught has